In the lovely aquamarine is Una Duggan. Una is the head of policy and advocacy at Birdwatch Ireland. She has over 2 decades of experience working for the environment in areas like climate change, marine and farmland biodiversity. And these very short, brief bios give us very little indication of the depth and wealth of Una's knowledge. So that's Una on the far end. Next to Una is Thomas Duffy. Thomas is a farmer. He was recently president of Macra na Firma and is currently one of the 4 vice presidents of the European Council of Young Farmers. He's been working in many different ways to support farmers in climate action and more sustainable farming practices. So that's Thomas. Next to Thomas is James Rayleigh. James is a senior ecologist at Trees for Life, which is the charity that Alan founded. Alan was talking a lot about Trees for Life today. And James works rewilding and surveying Caledonian pine woods in Scotland and is originally from Derry, is that right? Right. And we all know Mark and his visions. So are we going to, I think I will start with you, Una, and the birds, the beautiful birds.
Okay, hi everybody. Well, the first thing I want to say is I had a bit of a cry at the table when Mark finished speaking and my friend Rory had to listen to me, but I just felt, I don't know, suddenly it's like the burden of the losses, that Mark talked about and letting go of that control. And I realized I have been spending probably the last 25 years working for the environment, and I just suddenly felt this grief come up, and I'm still feeling a bit teary about it, but Mark's words are just really resonated, and I realized that the sense of grief and loss that I feel, but it also is a catalyst for, and it shows how much I love nature so much, and I love my job. It's a really hard job. I work trying to convince politicians to make more space for nature, and sometimes I spar with poor Thomas here on Twitter, and it's really tricky, but it's because I love it so much. And these the birds that we have in Ireland, the wildlife, the species that we don't even pay attention to enough, the bryophytes, the mosses, the lichens, the small insects that don't make headlines in the papers. They all work together in this amazing world that we have, that if we just paid a little bit more attention, and even to the ones that we can't see. Because, there used to be 5,000 breeding pairs of curlew in Ireland up to the 1990s, and now we're down to 128 breeding pairs. 2/3 of our wild bird species are in trouble in Ireland. Most of them you probably mightn't see, and you might see just your garden birds and your crows and seabirds, but there's so many are in trouble. And don't forget about the ones you can't see. That, I mightn't get to see a lion in my lifetime, but I'm happy to know that they're there. Just remember that. There's all this wildlife we just mightn't see, but love it anyway. So what I see for the future, I suppose, is, like as Mark said, every one of us has a voice for nature, and just, making sure we use that voice. But also, I'd like people to think about, and maybe this is preaching to the choir here, but just connecting to your food and where your food comes from, and remembering that farmers put the food on your tables, and that they're trying to make a living too, and that we can castigate certain practices, but it's a very complex situation, and the fishers and all those people. Just to remember that connection, I think, is really important. So the future I see is, to me now, in my ideal world, Una's world, we'd have thriving breeding wader populations of curlew, lapwing, snipe, and their beautiful colours and the way they move and talk, and they're so stunning. And you know, we'd have a mosaic of habitats and a much slower world where, you know, the farmers and the fishers were all working together. But, you know, that world is a real idealistic world, and, you know, that's the one I think of, but it's not that idealistic, really, because, you know, we are facing a climate crisis. But I really do believe if we just, simplify our lives, I think, a little bit, and make sure not to forget about all those species that we're not seeing. Some of them threatened by trees, I would say, as well. They don't like trees, some of these breeding waders. But just, remember them all.
Thank you, Una, that was really beautiful. I know that many people here completely agree with you, totally empathise and feel exactly as you do too. Thomas, Una touched on farming, and I think that the farming has come up many times over the weekend in one way or another. So it would be really great to have some visions for future farming, and maybe some sense of what are the practical steps that we need to do to get to those visions. What's missing at the moment that would support farmers to get to a vision?
Quite a lot is missing, being straight about it. So I'm more of I was actually just discussing with Una earlier on that one of my earliest memories is travelling down to one of our local, I was travelling down to one of our local lakes where we would often have fish kills, massive fish kills, reeking, stinking fish kills in one of our local lakes, and that ingrained in me a fear of seeing that on a bigger scale. Now, thankfully, our lake actually has cleaned up a little bit, and we don't get as many fish kills. The number of fish kills are down, but we still have a major problem with pollution in the water, and in some places it's getting worse. And even when we talk about that, it's actually very difficult because we can say we want clean water. Okay, well, what steps are you going to take? Well, we can ban all of everything. We can ban all pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, okay, and most of the farmers will go out of business, because that's the reality. The problem is, in many ways, farmers are trapped in a scenario between, not being mean, but the people in this room that have a mentality around caring for the environment, and people for whom beauty is astroturf and cheap chicken. And that's the reality of it. They see those things as being controlled, being beautiful. And I have to say, as a farmer, it's the biggest thing for farmers is that we are very much brought up with a mentality of control, and for the idea that an active management of a landscape would involve not controlling it is next to impossible. It's heresy. It's not even that it's a pragmatic problem. It's not only an ideological problem. It's in many ways a religious problem. Okay, good. So we have this challenge, and like I work at an EU level now. So you're asking me what's the gap between what we're doing. This week we had announcements from the EU Commission around the Great Green New Deal. That's wonderful. Okay, perfect. The same Commission will probably sign off on a trade deal in the next couple of months for the Mercosur countries to export beef into the EU, which will deforest the Amazon. We have the highest rate of deforestation in the Amazon at the moment. So how do we match up, and that's only to sell German cars. And this is the challenge for farmers who are trapped in the middle of it. We have great ambitions for how we want to change agriculture, but increasingly agriculturalists like myself, and agriculturalists are not just farmers, it's everybody in the sector, how we meet these things. One of the things that I'm very concerned about around kind of national policy at the moment is that there is a mentality of let the intensive, I don't like using the term intensive farmers, but let's say the commercial, highly stocked, particularly dairy farmers in the southeast of the country increase their outputs because we don't want to pay them money to do anything for the environment, and let's channel all the money to the west of Ireland, to the sheep and cattle farmers in particular, to take up environmental schemes. There's nothing wrong with putting a lot of money into the west of Ireland and protecting, but the problem is, are we going to say then that we're not going to have any waders in Carlow, in Cork, in Cavan, or at least my half of Cavan? And this is the problem that we have, because we're now dividing farmers very clearly between commercial farmers who are going to make money off their farm and farmers that are going to pay for biodiversity. And if we do that, we're going to end up with a divided country, one entirely nature gone, and the other half, a lot of people gone. And that's a challenge for how we actually address those two things. So, like, I know very highly stocked, very large, and there's three that come to mind, right? Myself and my own farm, we're quite highly stocked. We milk dairy cows, that's how we make our money. And I use that then to protect about 12 acres of SAC and another 8 acres of protected area with meadow sweet. I know one farmer who's milking, I think, over 250 cows. He's spent the far side of, I think it's 20,000, probably more, on a farm pond. And I know another one that's milking, I think, 350 cows. The man never stopped talking about dung beetles. He loves dung beetles. But the thing is, his talking about dung beetles has made every other commercial farmer like me start looking for dung beetles and start talking about them. That pond that we've seen has started me looking, and a lot of other farmers looking at that wet corner there. I'm going to dig that out and I'm going to make it a pond and a space for nature for those things. So even inside of very commercialised farms, there is space for nature. The question is how we make the two sit alongside each other is a very challenging thing. I wish I had a really easy answer. I wish the answer was everyone's going to pay more for food. The reality is everyone's going to pay more for food this year and the next couple of years, because that's what's going to happen with Ukraine. We are maybe at the end of the cheap food era, but the reality is the price is not going to be passed along to me that easily.
Thank you. There was thank you. Thomas, I felt enormously grateful that you were there in the middle of that tangle, helping to unravel it and to sort it out. I really do. Thanks so much. James, tell us about a little bit of visions around your world and what you're up to.
So earlier on today, I was wandering around the Burren trying to figure out what my vision for the future actually was. I'm going to just reflect a little bit on. Am I too close?
No, close enough.
I'm going to reflect a little bit on just some of the things that I've learned in Scotland. So for the last 4 years, I've been working in Scotland surveying Caledonian pine woods. And Caledonian pine woods are areas where populations of wild Scots pine has survived in Scotland. And Scots pine is just one of the wild trees that we have in Scotland. So wild trees are those that have naturally descended from the populations that recolonised after the Ice Age. Ireland has wild trees as well. The Caledonian pine woods are special because they are these areas with wild trees, and because the wild trees are still there, there's lots of other things that live there as well that have basically survived for thousands of years in the landscape, where they've been lost almost everywhere else across northwestern Europe. So anyway, I spent a lot of time in the Caledonian pine woods, and one of the most frustrating things that I would see is that most of the woodland expansion that's taking place in Scotland at the minute, which Scotland's very good at, it's very good at increasing tree cover. But I would go into a glen where you've got these populations of wild trees, and in Scotland the main problem is that there's really high numbers of deer at the moment. And for hundreds of years now, these woodlands have been very heavily grazed, first by sheep after the Highland clearances, and then by deer. And the deer are part of a kind of aristocratic hunting tradition. They keep deer numbers very high so that they can rich Europeans basically come and pay to shoot them. So it's a really messed up system. But the areas where trees are now being planted in the landscape are not the same places where these populations of wild trees are falling apart. So after a very long time of heavy grazing, you're left with old trees because no young ones can grow up, they keep getting eaten. And over time, eventually that forest just kind of falls away. So anyway, where am I going with this? So the wild tree populations are basically being sort of semi-ignored in Scotland. And you'll walk into a glen where there's these dying populations of wild trees and all the other things associated with that really ancient woodland that's thousands of years old. And then at the entrance to the glen, there's a big fence and there's a load of tree plantings happening inside it. So basically, the effort that's going into increasing tree cover is not actually in the place where trees really need to be in the landscapes in Scotland. The over-focus on tree planting means that we've ignored our populations of wild trees. And this is not the case absolutely everywhere. There's some estates which have focused on their wild tree populations And what they've done is they've brought the deer numbers down in the landscape to a level that's compatible with young trees growing up, compatible with healthy woodland. And where that's happened, we have woodland expanding out across the landscape. We see woodland types that have been almost completely lost, Monte and scrub, developing again. And we see these wild populations basically expanding. So I guess my vision for the future would be that we would actually prioritise wild trees. Tree planting at the moment is seen as the kind of thing that we need to do more of to be able to kind of reverse some of the damage that's been caused in the past. But actually tree planting is not that helpful in the kind of, whenever it's done on this kind of large scale way that ignores what's already there in the landscape, that ignores these wild tree populations and doesn't let them kind of recover themselves. So there's all kinds of issues with the kind of model of tree planting in Scotland at the moment, and I think there's a risk that Ireland repeats the same mistakes that we have in Scotland. We're kind of trying to turn this beast around so that we can focus more on wild trees and expanding out from these refuge areas, restoring the ancient woodlands at the same time as expanding them. In Ireland, there's very different challenges. So in the Scottish Highlands, you've got kind of high deer numbers everywhere. In Ireland, most of our ancient woodlands are in the lowlands, so they're within that kind of enclosed agricultural setting, and they normally sort of have survived along water courses, or there's some larger areas of ancient woodland which are in the wider landscape. The challenges facing them are not always the very heavy browsing pressure that we have in Scotland. Actually, one of the main problems in Ireland has been that in the 20th century, around half of our ancient woodland, which we have hardly any of in the first place, much less than 1% of the country, half of our ancient woodland was converted into commercial conifer plantations. And to restore those back to kind of natural ancient woodland is going to require kind of quite a big effort. But I think that's one of the areas that we should be focusing on in terms of improving the picture for our woodlands across the country. It is actually restoring those woods that were damaged by commercial forestry. In terms of expanding them, we have issues where if we just plant trees wherever people kind of want to plant them on bits of kind of rough ground, those are often the places which are actually already refuges for wildlife, refuges for our breeding waders, refuges for all kinds of things, Irish Leafy Tresses orchid, marsh fritillary butterfly. The ground that people want to plant because it's got low agricultural value is actually the most kind of precious stuff that we have left a lot of the time. My preference would be for areas of ancient woodland that we have in the landscape at the minute. If we were to prioritise the wild trees, what we would do is we would try and expand out from them. So we would focus woodland expansion around existing areas of woodland where there's going to be the greatest benefit in terms of habitat for wildlife and so on. And in intensively managed agricultural landscapes, a big barrier to that is the amount of nutrients that are built up in the soil now, which mean that woodland vegetation, natural woodland vegetation, struggles to re-establish itself. So in those cases, we'd have to reduce the nutrient loads first before we expand those woodlands, but at the end, you would get much better woodland. But yeah, I guess just generally, my message, my vision for the future is we prioritise wild trees. It's not to say we don't do tree planting, it's just that tree planting is lower down the list of things we want to do. We focus on areas of ancient woodland, areas where wild trees have survived in the landscape, and all the associated wildlife with them have also survived in those areas, and then expand out from them. And that carries all of that rich wildlife out with it, which can't colonise areas of woodland which are just planted up somewhere disconnected, for example. So yeah, that's I guess that's my vision.
James, thanks very much. When you were talking, I just wondered, is there something that keeps you in Scotland? We'd really like it if you came back here. Is there a reason that you're in Scotland? Like, would it be hard to come back?
So yeah, my partner lives in Scotland, and also it's actually a really exciting place to be working at the moment. There's a lot of stuff happening, and I'm very lucky to have a job which is quite empowering. So some of the ideas that we've kind of been coming up with are actually, we're able to start implementing them now, which is really exciting. So yeah, I've definitely still got quite a lot of work to do there.
Thank you, James. So, Mark, just to finish off on the visions, would you share some visions, please?
Visions. I guess it depends what day you ask me. Like some days I'm feeling quite pragmatic and realistic about things, and then other days I'm feeling quite romantic and feeling like dreamy. So how am I feeling this evening? I think I'm feeling, well, there's a lot of wonderful people in here, so I'm feeling quite romantic, I think. So I would probably say my vision is something like, if you can imagine waking up in this country and hearing that, you know, what a fucking beautiful thing, you know. And like people, I've read a lot about wolves and I've seen wolves and I've talked to a lot of people and people say wolves can't be here. But we can have fucking data centers all over the country. And we can have Google, we can have Amazon, we can have Apple. Why can't we have a few packs of wolves? Like, is that too much to ask? You know? So I think we need to get bold sometimes and have a bold vision, because I think bold inspires. You know, we can go in half-arsed and achieve very little, or we can go bold. And I think there's a real feeling now. Like Oliver Cromwell got rid of wolves from 1650 onwards. I think it's an act of patriotism. We should bring wolves back. That's what we should do. That's my simple vision. Ask me tomorrow, it gets very realistic again. Very, very boring.
Snakes.
John Moriarty, the Irish philosopher, sadly you lost him a few years ago. He used to say when the animals leave, they take their medicine with them. And Ireland is without wolf medicine, and I think it would be a much better place if we had the wolf medicine back.
Can you all join me in a howl?
Yeah. Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
The last thing before we all start to devour things ourselves. One of the things that came up as being missing, or possibly is there in some way but could be better, is more coordination between the voices that are calling for change. So more coordination between the different groups that already exist, the advocacy groups within nature. So Una, I don't know if you have many allegiances and alliances with other organizations. Can we just talk a little bit about that briefly, each of you, if you have anything to say on that, and like this connecting for more of a voice?
Yeah, we work with a range of organisations through the Environmental Pillar, which is a advocacy network of NGOs in Ireland. But we also work with Stop Climate Chaos and the Sustainable Water Network. What I'd like to see, though, is more connection with the farming organisations, with Thomas, and with, you know, more dialogue to break down barriers and see where we can get more waders in on intensive agriculture land. So that's what I would like to see happen. But you know, this is the thing, like the NGOs are really poorly funded in Ireland, right? And so funding time, I mean, you know, most of the farming reps, Thomas, I don't know about you and CJ or how it works, but a lot of it's volunteer work, you know, like for a lot of probably home tree, you know, for a lot of folk. So it's really hard, you know, to do everything, and we need more people involved, you know, to try and build up that network.
Would you answer that, Thomas?
Yeah. Even getting the farmers to work with each other is probably because that's the reality. There are a huge range of views and opinions in the farming community. We often look at the farming community, I think, as a kind of a homogenous group, all with the same kind of ambitions, all with the same agendas, all with the same kind of ideology. There are 5, I would say, legitimate organisations in the country, or at least department recognised for policy groups in the country. Mocker is the oldest one, and we accidentally or directly gave birth to every one of the other ones. We did. every single one of them has branched off us somewhere along it. And what was quite interesting is actually the founder of Mocker na Firma, a guy called Stephen Cullinan, who actually passed away at 31 years of age of asthma. Brilliant visionary man. But when you go back and you read his vision for Ireland and working together, it's like nothing that really is being done at the moment. I would say though, see, this is the issue sometimes in farming organisations and in anything. You know, they say what's the first thing that's on the agenda in any Irish organisation? Split. And the reality is a lot of the organisations have actually just split off each other over time. Mocker remains its own body in that. The problem is very often finding common ground, because broadly speaking, there are two forms of farmer in the country. There is the farmer who is a business person. He has a mentality of production. As I say, that's a very broad category, because some of them actually do have a passion for the environment as well. But the reality is those guys are there. Look, straight up, I'm one of them. I make money. That's my full-time income is farming. I need to support myself and my parents, both of them, to some extent, because it's not fair for me to take over the farm and them out the door. And it's the reality for a lot of farmers. Sorry, there's a child here, I forgot. Yeah, but then there is the more, I don't want to say romantic farmer, but there is the more farming as a way of life. And that farmer is often easier to reach with schemes. It's easier to engage with them in some ways. It's a less intensive form of farming. But both of them have their own individual challenges. Like, I, as a commercial farmer, right, I'll look at something and go, okay, I could cut my hedges every single year into a lovely box shape. I say lovely, but like a nice square box shape, right? And it'll do nothing for the environment. And it'll also waste a ton of money. Like, why would I spend money, cutting my hedges every single year when I can cut them on a 3-year cycle, and I do it better for the environment? It's better for the biodiversity, it's better for everything in it. Yet, a farmer who is not as focused on money will say, no, I like having the box shape. I like having a tidy farm. The tidy farm mentality comes down into it. So you've got two separate types of farmers that if you say the right messaging to those farmers, right? If you appeal to the extensive farmer, the more way of life farmer, say, okay, we're not taking away food to production, because that's what you core of your being is, we produce food, right? And it really cuts at farmers when we say we don't produce food, or we're producing something that doesn't matter or whatever. But if you can say to that farmer, okay, well, you're increasing the value of your farm and you're making it more important by having all this biodiversity and this richness on it, that mentality will appeal to them. If you turn around to a more commercial farmer and say, right, we can save you money, we can cut your emissions, what's the point in draining those couple of acres of land? They're not going to be productive, they're never going to produce more than 5 to 10 tonne of dry matter. I'm not going to get into that now, but anyway. If you do that mentality of cost benefit analysis with that type of farmer, a lot of them will actually come with you. As I say, the reason the messaging around, say, dung beetles has worked so well on worming is because it meant, all right, well, we don't have to worm as much, which means a lot less work for us and a lot less cost. So you have two separate farms, you need to deal with them individually in many ways. And as I say, it's a huge spectrum across those two separate farms.
Thank you.
This just reminds me of the conversation we had last night about communication and different languages. Catherine spoke about that, the different languages for different audiences.
James, have you some thoughts on connecting up of organisations and people, voices?
One of the most valuable things for organisations working in Scotland has been looking towards southwest Norway, which has a similar climate to the Highlands of Scotland, but it's went through this kind of natural afforestation over the last 100 plus years, and you have sheep farmers, grazing sheep in woodland in that landscape. A lot of the kind of binaries that we built up in our head about how things have to be, you can see through them whenever you actually look outwards. And there was a guy, Duncan Halley, he's from Scotland, he works in southwest Norway for the NINA, it's called the Norway Institute for Nature and something. But anyway, Duncan Halley's been really instrumental in bringing that kind of vision from southwest Norway to Scotland so that we can see outside the system that we're in at the minute to see what the possibilities actually are. I think that will be really, really valuable for Ireland as well, for Ireland to be outward looking to some of those other areas that are similar in the world, but are kind of at different stages maybe than we are, or where looking towards those areas could help us to see, help us to develop a vision and help us to see kind of how to get there. So I think there'd be a lot of value in kind of cultural exchange between Scotland and Ireland and Norway as well, in terms of woodland stuff particularly. I don't know exactly kind of who to match up in that, but yeah, I think there's definitely something there, and some of the issues that we have in the Highlands of Scotland are exactly the same issues that are in County Kerry, where there's a lot more upland woodland there, for example, and then some challenges will be more kind of just our own. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of there's a lot that we could learn from kind of looking outwards, and there's a lot that those other places could learn from coming to us. So I think that's.
Thanks, James. Mark, as we just finish up, I'm going to give you the final word on that. I'm just thinking of critical mass and the Overton window. I don't know if those terms mean anything to you. I lectured on behalf of Extinction Rebellion, and the Overton window is where we raise consciousness sufficiently among the general public, and enough people are demanding change, that change happens naturally.
So what's the question?
The question is just give us the right answer to end the note on.
You're probably asking the wrong man, because I spend most of my time just sitting in the cabin writing words, so avoiding people. Yeah, I don't actually know much. I couldn't say much to that effect, to be honest.
Perhaps just kind of considering your own work, like you were sitting on your own in a cabin and you wrote some books that affected a lot of people. Do you see that you have made impact and change just by speaking out?
I try not to think in those terms, to be honest. I just try to wake up in the morning and do what I do.
Oh, freaking phone, Mark.
Being honest though, it's like I don't try to put too much attention on the fruits of your labour, you know. I think the key is just doing what you love doing and seeing what happens. So I think if we all just done what we love doing and followed our hearts, whatever needs to happen will happen. Don't try to overthink it. So I think I think if we all done that, then and to open up our worlds again. I joke about living in a cabin on my own, but we also have a free hostel up there, and lots of wonderful people who pass through the whole time, and kind of great things happen. People meet each other. A few of them here tonight, and I think opening up those kind of spaces as well for the kind of informal meetings is important. I think we used to have a culture here a long time ago, having an open door policy, where people could come and have a place to be without charging 150 quid a night. That was part of our culture. I think we would do well to get it back. So I think if we can open our doors to people, strangers, friends, everyone, let people back in, and just follow your heart in life, do the thing you love doing, and let whatever be.
Thank you so much.